I'm excited to introduce our trainer. Michelle McBee was appointed as the Management Analyst with the Office of Academic Affiliation effective January 31st, 2021. Prior to this appointment, Michelle served as the Business Manager for Network Contracting Office 9, where she was responsible for the COOP plan during the COVID-19 National Public Health Emergency. She supported NCO9 and Regional Procurement Office Central, providing in-office support enabling contracting officers to work remotely. Preceding that, she was the Innovation Director and Sale Coordinator at the Atlanta VAHCS, where she also served as the Acting Assistant Director overseeing engineering, EMS, police, veterans experience, and the medical media. Michelle is also a veteran of the United States Air Force, where she repaired F-15 Avionics Systems. With that, Michelle, it's all yours.
Good afternoon and welcome. I really appreciate everybody who is joining us today. So let me get to the next slide. All right, first and foremost, thanks for coming to today's session and investing in your time and your career as federal employees. Second, we will be using a tool that some of you may or may not have used called Slido during this presentation. So if you have a phone, please go ahead and grab it because the application does allow you to scan a QR code. You can also go to slido.com and enter the number that will be displayed if you want to go from a web browser. Your individual responses are anonymous, and so we will go ahead, give you just a second to grab those if you don't have them, and we will begin. Just a second. Give me just a second, guys. I am going to see why that did not present. Just 1 second. This worked.
Michelle, Aisha here. If you need any help from me, just let me know.
Oh, absolutely. It does look like we have a technical error today, but that's okay. There's always the use of the chat box. So we will use that in lieu because there is a technical area. So if you could in the chat box, just put the first word or word that comes to mind when you think about your goals for your performance year. Routine. All right, I'm going to let you guys go ahead and keep adding if you'd like, but I'm going to highlight a few that I see. I see excellence. I see outcome driven. I saw do more with less. I saw some that said non-existent, learning, expansion. So adaptation, promotion. So as we can see, everybody approaches or feels differently as the performance year starts. Some of that will be based off of past, your past performance year and how that year turned out, past supervision, and past work that you've done. So three things to consider when planning your performance here. And when I say planning, I'm really talking about planning for yourself and for the organization that you work for. So number one is recognizing limitation and opportunities. So we saw that in the list that you gave us, doing more with less. That sounds like there are some limitations that will affect your performance here. So you're going to leverage shared goals, focus on areas that provide the biggest return on investment. This means understanding your goals, your bandwidth, your audience needs, which also can be seen as your organization's needs, being pragmatic, and using your expertise as authority, a right support at the right time. Use research and best practice and learn your agency's content. Every agency has different content. For VHA, we have a strategic plan that is released. We use that when we're developing our performance goals and our performance years. So again, Slido is not working today, but that's okay. How comfortable are you taking risk as long as the risk supports my project? So let's do it on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 being I do not want to take risk, 5 being I'm willing to take risk to support my project. And go ahead and put that in the chat. We'll leave it open for just a few minutes while you guys add that. All right, it looks like most people are around a 4, though I do see some are up to as high as a 7 and some are as low as a 2. So a lot goes into how comfortable a person is in taking a risk to support both their performance year goals and projects that they're assigned, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Just so you're aware, my risk tolerance is strong. That has a lot to do with my past work experience. Being involved in innovation, innovation has a ton of risk in it, both for the agency and personally. And so they tend to choose in my agency people who have high risk tolerance to do those types of jobs. Another thing to think about when dealing with risk and your performance year and your performance goals is understanding risk appetite versus risk tolerance. And so, one way to think about this is when you went on travel for your last vacation or your last trip, what lane did you drive in? Were you in the right lane? Were you in the middle lane? Were you in the far left lane? And so risk appetite tends to be set by your agency. That's the amount of risk that the agency or organization is willing to take. So for this example, the ranges for the highway are generally 0 to 70 miles an hour. And that is the risk appetite. The tolerance, depending on what state you live in and where you're traveling, the risk tolerance might be from 70 to 80 miles an hour. So if you're on the highway and the speed is 70, you might be comfortable going 80 in that far left lane. That's risk tolerance is really guided by your supervisor. Understanding your supervisor's risk tolerance when working on projects, especially in team-based work, is really important because, as we know, there are some areas you cannot drive 1 mile over that speed limit or you're going to get a ticket, right? And so, really building those relationships and having that communication to understand the risk tolerance is very important. And then there's unacceptable risk. Unacceptable risk is in the driving. Um, you know, over 80 miles an hour, you're probably getting a ticket in most states and most highways, right? And so that's the unacceptable risk that is not able to be covered by your organization or your supervisor. So again, risk appetite set by the organization, risk tolerance guided by your supervisor. When we talk about risk, everybody deals with different type of risks when developing their performance goals and writing to their performance here. And so those can be operational risk, fiscal risk, compliance risk. And as a federal employee, I know VHA, VA, we deal with this a lot, but this really is across all federal agencies' reputational risk. And that is something that might have a little less tolerance than other types of risks. When we talk about taking these risks and building our performance here, failing forward is really, really important. Nothing new, nothing innovated, nothing is improved if we're not willing to take some risk, learn from our failures, and fail forward. And so, as you can see in this image, the one employee has the failure stacking on top of his head. It's crushing, right? That's where you're going to see a ton of burnout. Is if those failures are stacking instead of building. So I'm going to give you an example in healthcare of failing forward. This is a healthcare example of Doug Dietz does a really great TED talk on this. This is an MRI machine. When it was designed, these run between $1 and $3 million. The cost may have increased based off of the current rate, but between $1 and $3 million, this machine was designed, and it was supposed to innovate and improve healthcare. And when Doug went to go visit one of the clinics to see how this was operationalized, he was an industrial designer. He wanted to see the process. He learned from the nurses that 80% of children who had to have an MRI had to be sedated. So this great and wonderful machine that he created was actually seen as a risk to the healthcare staff taking care of the patients, because there are all types of clinical risks sedating 80% of the patients that are children that needed an MRI. They were also having to sedate adults, but mostly it was the children. So he went back and decided he needed to, with his team, redesign the MRI machine. But again, this is from $1 to $3 million. And redesigning this machine to be child friendly, whether it was going to be smaller, did it need to be open air? What were the designs that would make this less, design options that would make this less scary for children that had to enter it? So got his team together, and his team included the right people. It included both the industrial designers, the healthcare team, the nurses, but most importantly, it included the children and the parents. So you see, building the right team, it was able to change the MRI machine in such a way that both it was cost effective, because adding design elements, painting rooms, kid-friendly MRI scanners reduced the overall sedation for children from 80% to less than 5%. This was again, just an example in healthcare where they failed forward. And by listening and designing and thinking about who needed to be on the team and how to make the changes that needed to be made, Doug and his team were able to, again, meet the needs of the clinical staff and the families that they were serving. So communication is key. So in your performance year, most of us have an introduction to our performance standards. We get some sort of mid-year and then our closeout. Communication can happen outside of those meetings. When working on projects, working with risk, sharing the why, sharing the how, and showing results will help build that trust. I have found personally in my career growth that the longer I have a supervisor, the more trust I'm able to build. When I get a new supervisor, sometimes I'm starting over to build that trust to allow them to let me move in those areas of risk tolerance. So when thinking about projects and thinking about how I am going to uh, move through my performance year, I do consider that. How long have I had this supervisor? What are their goals? What are our shared goals? Outside of your performance, individual development plans, our IDPs, are fantastic ways for you and your supervisor to work together. They're utilized to assist employees in career and personal development. They focus on short-term and long-term career goals, and it's a partnership between the supervisor and the employee. Um, again, this is outside your general performance standards, um, but it is very effective if you use an IDP to assist in your career growth, in your career path. IDPs have 5 stages. A lot of this information comes directly from OPM, but the pre-planning is done by the supervisor and the employee independently. So these are separate, um, uh, basically workshops for yourself where you're going to plan what you want to add to your IDP. Then the employee and supervisor will meet, discuss strengths, areas of improvement, interests, goals, and organizational requirements. Areas of improvement exist for all of us. So it's one of those things to be very open about because when preparing an IDP, again, this is not your performance rating or your performance standards. This is really about you and how you want to grow and improve. You prepare the IDP in consultation with your supervisor and then implement the plan. The employee pursues training and development identified in the plan. And then at the end of the year, you evaluate the incomes and the usefulness of the training and development experiences. This will help both with understanding where you're at in your own growth, but also you'll be able to share this information in the future with people that you may supervise, you may mentor, or you may coach. So these IDPs are not only useful for the year that they're created in, but they're useful documentations of what it took to get where you're going. The executive development plan, very, very similar to the IDP, but individual development plans are a choice. You choose to have one as an employee and a supervisor. It's a working relationship. EDPs are not a choice. They are mandated for senior executives by law, and they include a couple things that aren't generally included in IDPs, and that is coaching and mentoring. They become significant components of an executive development program because they offer opportunities for continuous learning, application of feedback interpretation, and focus on current and real issues. Okay, so again, Slido's not working, so I apologize, but when do you guys start writing your self-assessment? Is it at the start of your performance year, in the middle of your performance year, or at the end of your performance year? Go ahead and put your response in the chat. The end?
Mhm. The day before.
The day before? Okay. Isn't it at the end? Okay, so I'm seeing day 1. I'm seeing at the end. I'm seeing people who say they track it throughout the year. As you go, end of year. Okay, when I remember to. So this is really normal responses that I see across different agencies as to when people start writing their self-assessment. But it's something to think about when you're thinking about self-care. The self-assessment is really, truly where you are allowed to brag about the work that you have done and the things that you have accomplished. So, while not required by most employees, self-assessments are important to the employee as they are to the supervisor. When you are writing your self-assessment is when you can truly identify any gaps in what you need to accomplish for the year. When you start writing your self-assessment, if you start it when you're issued your performance standards, you have the best chance of identifying those gaps in your performance. Reading your performance standards and writing your self-assessment, even if it's a skeleton, you're writing it as a skeleton of your goals and you're filling it out throughout the year. It is really, really helpful in your performance year if you have started that self-assessment from day one. At the second thing is that mid-year, sharing your self-assessment with your supervisor. Make sure you're on the same page. They may have written something and you thought, oh, I'm going in this direction, and they would like you to go in a different direction. At that midpoint, if you have already drafted a start of your self-assessment, those discussions with your supervisor will be more productive. And then incorporate feedback. So if you got feedback from your self-assessment at your mid-year, you can incorporate that when you do your final self-assessment. And I always say, keep calm and let the data speak for itself. Now, not every metric that we track is backed by data, but those ones that are really helpful for you and your supervisor. They're helpful for setting goals. And again, data tends to be irrefutable as long as it's good data. So when you're doing your self-assessment, what you want to say and what they are interested in and the relevance, right? And so this goes back to that relationship you've built with your supervisor and how you have planned your year. And so when you're writing your self-assessment, you definitely want to find the areas of relevance and write to that. What is your supervisor most interested in? I have seen self-assessments, and every organization's a little bit different. I have seen self-assessments that are 10 pages long, and I have seen self-assessments that are 4 pages long, and they are both effective. So it's really based on your writing style and understanding your goals and your supervisor's or organizational goals to making sure that you are able to craft that self-assessment at the end of the year that is most relevant. So I do see a chat question. I'm just going to read it off real quick. It says, do you recommend starting with the mid-year and adding it to the end of the year? Or if the mid-year is in May, do you start in June for the end of year one? Yeah, so this is a living document. That's what I would say about this. This is a living document. So you will start it. I recommend starting it at the beginning of your rating cycle so that you have built out a skeleton of what you will write for the year. This way, if there are gaps or if there are things you need, you can notify your supervisor or leadership early on in the rating period. I'll give an example of that. If your performance rating says that you will collaborate with 3 external partners and they identify the external partners, and one of those external partners has basically left the organization and is no longer partnering with your organization, right? That's a gap, and you'll be able to identify that very early on and either have that performance standard rewritten to say 2, so collaborate with 2, or have a third one added by your supervisor. So your supervisor knows, oh, they no longer have 3 external partners that they need to partner with, that they can partner with. We need to get them another one. And so that's why keeping track of it and really understanding those goals as early as possible will prevent, well, not prevent, but will assist in your end of year self-assessment. So your self-assessment is a chance to be your own advocate. And while these are generally optional for employees, I have been a supervisor. I'm not currently a supervisor, but I have been a supervisor of 120 direct support staff. I cannot tell you how helpful the self-assessments were at the end of the year. It really does help your supervisor. So be confident, be proud, be honest. When I say be honest, um, that's where the data comes in. That's where tracking throughout the year will help you, so that you know if you collaborated on a project or if you led a project, because those are two different things. And so writing to those strengths, writing to what you did, will help. Be concise. Again, depending on your performance standards, you may need 10 pages. You may only need 4, but you'll know that as you develop your writing and improve your writing. And then be early. I say be early because a lot of performance work across the federal government basically grows. And so your self-assessment may support an SES metric. And so providing that information as early as possible will assist you and your supervisor in supporting your organizational goals. Track achievements year-round. It will make the process so much easier for you if you're tracking year-round. There are different ways and tools. OneNote, if you have access to OneNote, is a great way to track your performance throughout the year. Some people use Excel. I have to find an Excel guru to properly use Excel, so I stick with OneNote. But there are lots of different tools that you can utilize to track your own performance. And then your IDP can be utilized to inform your self-assessment. And so that is, again, that document is really helpful for informing your self-assessment. And again, with those IDPs, those are optional. But I will tell you that as you grow in your career, seeing that, having those historical documents of where you've been, what you've learned, and where you're going is really helpful, especially when you are coaching or mentoring junior staff. You'll have a document that you can refer to show them that path. And that is the end of my formal slides, but I would love to open it up for questions. I saw some comments about when thinking about your performance year, it being non-existent. Um, this really, while we do this to support the organizations that we work for, this is really for you. You are the best asset the federal government has. One of the reasons that we focus so much on setting standards, building projects, and meeting goals is because we are utilizing the taxpayers' dollars, right? And we want to do that in the best way that we can. And those performance year goals, those performance evaluations, they're really a representation of the work and the great work that you have done. And so I do hope that you think about planning these, performance years out, maybe engaging in the IDP process or the EDP process, depending on where you're at in your career, and continuing to learn, because we are all not only career federal employees, but also career learners, because of change is inevitable. So, do you have any questions or comments? Okay, so what do you do if you've written and submitted your goals and they are not been responded to? I can tell you, I have missed an email before. I wish I hadn't, but I have missed an email. If you have written and submitted your goals, and I'm guessing that's an IDP, but and you don't get feedback, two things I would suggest. I would remind them in an email or schedule a meeting to discuss. Sometimes that is the best way, especially if you work in a virtual environment already. Meetings are very easily scheduled, and you can have the document to discuss. I did see Linda's hand raised.
Yes. What if you are a more seasoned employee? We'll say, I've never had an IDP, and I really, really stink at bragging or putting things out there like that. What can we do throughout the year? I mean, I have a Outlook calendar thing. I just keep moving with all my due dates and moving the things that are done to the bottom. So I have a list, but to put that into a feedback to my boss is extremely difficult and time consuming during a very busy part of our year.
Yes, absolutely. And that is, so you already have started a process. First of all, you already have a process. It's moving down. You have a list, right? But even taking that list and creating a self-assessment at the end of the year, when the fiscal year is closing, when all the things are going on, can be additional work that you don't necessarily have to do. Because if you start it early on, if you are a person that does not like to brag about yourself, you can stick with the numbers. You can grab the project feedback from other people and use that to support your self-assessment. So what I would suggest is either moving that into a Word or a OneNote, some sort of document that you can track throughout the year. And so when you're writing, write it as depending on your organization, how they like to see our organization, we write it in third person. And so it's Miss McBee did blah, 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 right? Miss McBee did this. And so go ahead and get that written out in sentence format. And even if you have to block off time quarterly on your calendar, that is for personal development. If you do the first 3 quarters and the fourth quarter, you won't have much left to do. And so that's what I would suggest is take that list you've already started and break it up and go ahead and put it in paragraph form throughout the year.
Okay, thank you.
What do you do when you feel like your growth and performance goals are not being supported by your supervisor? At times, it feels like staff are onboarded to support other staff, but their personal professional goals are not supported in the same manner. So I would say that if you are feeling this way, other people on your team are probably feeling this way as well. And so finding ways to engage your supervisor is going to have a lot to do with your organizational goals. So I will give you one example. I worked in an office that had no educational funds available to them. So if people wanted to go to like an OPM training, or if they wanted to go do something outside of our talent management system, there weren't funds for them to be able to do that. Well, we still had a lot of team members that wanted to grow. They wanted to learn and develop new skills. And so we did a couple things. Well, number one is we went into our talent management system, so our government training system, and pulled out items like Excel trainings, like things that they were interested in doing, and created a secondary list for them to look at and shared it amongst the team. So everybody felt like they had equitable access to those trainings. The second thing we did, and we were successful at, was we pitched a lunch and learn series to our supervisor and our leadership. And that allowed the employees who did take those trainings then to share that experience and share that education with their teammates. And so that's how we started our learning journey. In that it was a smaller organization, but that's how we started that learning journey and engaging the supervisor in that journey. I will tell you, in that situation, the two people that really became outstanding in Excel because they took those courses really supported our cause to allow others to attend ongoing continual education training. And I see a comment that says, get a mentor. 100% support that. It is, it's invaluable if you become a mentor. It's invaluable to your mentees. Getting a mentor early on in your career and in your mid-career and as a senior executive, as you saw in the EDP plans, mentors and coaching, which are two different skill sets. But mentoring and coaching is highly integrated into those EDPs, because that is how we truly grow, is if we are sharing common knowledge and supporting lifelong learners. Learn, do, teach is a great process. Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you are approaching your organization with a business plan for educational funding, or some other executive decision memo, things like that, to support you or your team members to get additional training, such as the OPM trainings that cost money. One of the ways you can support that is with this learn, do, teach. So we're going to send 2 employees to learn. They're going to do the job. They're going to perform. And then they'll take that information and teach other employees within the organization. So that is a great cycle, and it helps support educational plans and educational development. Are there any other questions? Well, I have one final thing to share. We have all, if you have worked for the federal government for more than 10 years or 5 years, we have all run into a supervisor that has been a struggle. They may be a struggle because they are overwhelmed themselves. They may be a struggle because they don't understand the organizational goals or organizational, the strategic or operational goals. Do not, I tell this to my kids. I have 9 of them, guys. I tell this to my children. Do not let your teacher derail your education. Do not let your supervisor derail your growth or your performance. Really, truly, your performance year is about you. It's about your contributions. It's about you giving to the federal government and the organization and doing the best you can. And so when I develop my performance year, I look at my previous year and I look to outdo the work that I did the year before. And where my rating ends, it ends. That is, I leave it all on the table and it comes out where it comes out. And so I always tell people it's really important to focus on the fact that this is yours. And so I hope if you take nothing else from this, you hear that your performance year, designing your goals and meeting those goals, is for you. And it will support your organization as you go through the process. Sure.
While we're giving some more time for any questions and all of that, just want to say thank you to our wonderful presenter, Michelle, for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us today on our last session for this Monday. As a reminder, we will be sending out a post-session survey on Thursday at the end of the forum. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. And with that, I'd like to say thank you again, and we will stay for a few more minutes to take any last questions.